Hi there. Come join us over on The Deprogram, a podcast I run with Second Thought and Yugopnik.
To quote our favorite authoritarian GT, have these gentlemen ever seen these nuts?
Intro topics, history, memes, and me being perpetually tired, all of it is at your disposal over on the links in the description and pinned comment. Hello. Today we're looking at this video by Sabine Hossenfelder titled, Capitalism is Good. Let me explain. Now, I've never come across this person before, but I'm getting a STEMmy, I know everything stereotype. I'm probably wrong, this was an instant issue of strange delivery, and it goes without saying that you shouldn't bother this person, obviously. Let's critique the argument. She immediately starts with an overly drawn-out explanation of what money is, by beginning with barter. Sorry to say, but bartering is mostly a myth. Ideas of gift exchange, mutual share of labor, etc. did exist, but beyond delayed credit, as an I owe you X and I'll get it, or an agreed upon equivalent back to you by Y, bartering has never actually existed within communities, although barter between communities has been theorized on a tribal level. She's already started her video off on a bad note. Graeber's Debt to the First 5,000 Years is a recommended read for those interested. She describes money as an exchange medium, which isn't entirely wrong, but is a little simplistic. Money hasn't always existed, and its development is closely linked to the development of class society. Money as we know it today arose because of the development of commodities, meaning goods produced specifically for exchange rather than individual or common consumption. With the development of commodity production, as in production for exchange on a market, trade develops, and with trade comes the money commodity, essentially a universal equivalent. Likewise, money was also historically, and in a way still is, a system of credits and debts, meaning a system of accounting. In the final analysis, to use a Marxist trope, money is a representation of value, and that's kind of where the crux of the matter is. What is value, you ask? Well, I have several videos on that here, otherwise chapter 1 of Marx's Capital goes into the detail you'll need.
Suppose you have a lot of apples and not sufficiently many people to buy them. Your amazing apples rot away. What a shame. You would like to make apple juice from them, but you can't afford a juice press, so your breakthrough innovation doesn't come into being. That sucks. However, your friend Sue has been getting really rich with all her chickens. So rich, in fact, she's sitting on a big pile of money that she doesn't know what to do with. Sue sees your problem and offers you a deal. She gives you some of her money so that you can buy your juice press. You just have to agree that if you get rich with your juice press, you give her the money back, plus something on top. That money which Sue gives to you is your capital. And such was born the capitalist. The capitalist is a person or institution who provides capital to those who want to launch a new business.
She goes on to misunderstand what capital and capitalists are, essentially indicating that it's simplified investor activity. I'll give you money to start your business, but you have to pay me back plus a little extra. This isn't what a capitalist or capitalism is. Capital is self-expanding value, or a value which generates surplus value and hence more capital, as a result of exploitation of wage labor. In other words, land, buildings, machinery, hired labor, amongst other things, used to generate more capital down the line. Pause the screen and read if you're further interested. If we're being generous, she's only defining money capital here, which is a very incomplete definition. As for capitalists, they're not simply those that provide funds for businesses. Capitalism is a system based on the private ownership of the means of production, wage labor, markets, and in a slightly technical note, generalized commodity production. It follows that capitalists are number 1, owners of the means of production, number 2, own capital in some meaningful form that's invested in the circuit of capital, and number 3, engage in wage labor. Someone providing money as investment capital could be a capitalist, but that's a niche and narrower example of something much bigger.
Capitalism and all the elaborate financial instruments that come with it is a surprisingly recent innovation. It didn't really take off until the Industrial Revolution 150 years ago, and it's dramatically changed the world.
This is again not the full story. Yes, capitalism became generally globalized, forcibly so I might add, by the 1800s, but primitive capitalist formations date back further. I won't go into too much detail, but the book The Origin of Capitalism by Ellen Wood is fantastic.
Scientists tend to associate the stunning societal progress we've seen since then to science and technology. But I think that's having it backwards. The driver of all this progress was the capitalist system that allowed an efficient allocation of resources. By resources, I don't just mean raw materials, but also goods and human resources. Capitalism is a system that distributes these resources without anyone needing to have an overview, just by interactions between traders. It's pure genius if you think about it. And that's why science took off, not the other way round.
This is a technical point, in that she's wrong, but in a correct way. Capitalism is a step up and progressive compared to feudalism and other pre-capitalist formations, as it introduced important political and economic changes. Politically, and due to complex developments, it broke up fiefdoms, serf setups, and other barriers to concentrated labor in small urban areas. With the enclosure of the commons and other limitations on subsistence farming, people were huddled into crowded cities where factories sprung up, hungry for labor. Capitalism likewise standardized production and allowed for the expansion of the productive forces, to use some jargon, which essentially means increase the ability to build more stuff more quickly, efficiently, and cheaply. With this came increased scientific ability and discovery, but here she makes two mistakes. The first being that capitalism is the supposed end-all and be-all, and that no other superior system would arise from the contradictions of capitalism, as earlier, capitalism arose from the contradictions of feudalism. We'll get back to this point. And secondly, she completely forgets the absolutely indispensable role of state investment. This is a point that generally cannot be understated. Practically every single modern innovation that has dramatically improved people's lives has risen out of civilian state-funded research or military research, which is likewise state-funded. You need larger maintained labs, regular research staff, intricate machinery, and lots of funding. The logic of capitalism, on the other hand, is quick profit, because every second at a net loss is ultimately dangerous for a capitalist enterprise. No profit means no ability to expand further, which means relative stagnation compared to competition, which will eventually eat you alive. Market competition has winners, and winners require either preferential treatment from the state or more profit, which can be reinvested in the circuit of capital for further expansion. That's why it's absolutely no surprise that the state and intelligent policy is what determines major breakthroughs, not the market. A great book on this point is The Entrepreneurial State by Mariana Mazzucato.
Extract penicillin in large quantities. They then conducted medical trials, and once they were sure penicillin was both safe and effective, their method was scaled up by the pharmaceutical industry. Two members of the Oxford group later shared the Nobel Prize with Fleming. So what saved all those many lives wasn't just Fleming's observation in a petri dish. The game changer was producing the stuff in large quantities and bringing it where it was needed. Innovation and industrialization ultimately going back to capitalism. That's what saved all those people.
She didn't do her research here because, unsurprisingly, it was government funding, particularly for military purposes, that managed to scale up the development of penicillin, not the private sector. US military leaders mobilized these resources instead of prioritizing economic goals. Staff and supplies began flying all over the world. This approach induced collaboration, providing access to a previously unfathomable network of scientific exchange. Extensive coordination by government agencies made this collaboration possible. The Office of Scientific Research and Development initiated US involvement with penicillin and oversaw most of the scientific work prior to 1943. It coordinated a total of 57 research contracts covering the preliminary studies of penicillin, clinical trials, and extensive research into the drug's chemical synthesis. Typically, only once government and tax money made sure penicillin was entirely viable and profitable, it was handed over to the private sector. Think of any major contributor to quality of life nowadays, and this is the story for the vast majority of things. On the innovation industrialization ultimately going back to capitalism point, this goes back to what we said earlier about her thinking that capitalism is the end-all be-all system. Capitalism standardized production, yes, and expanded the productive forces, yes, but only to a point. After which capitalism begins outliving its usefulness as the core short-term drive for profit within capitalism begins to limit any meaningful long-term development without heavy government intervention. This then begs the question, capitalism is itself a political system too, in which the capitalist ruling class uses its power to mobilize the state towards whatever ends suit it. That's why the environmental catastrophe we're seeing now is unraveling. The logic of capitalism isn't to fix these issues because it's not profitable, but pollution, fudging emission data, removing environmental legislation, and other shady practices are. Why bother with controlling something that has this inbuilt political stubbornness, aside from the many contradictions that will eventually bring the system or us as a species down regardless? When instead we can go beyond into a system of economic planning, the abolition of wage labor, and the private ownership of capital, so that society's resources are mobilized for all rather than the profit of a tiny sliver at the top. Regardless, innovation and industrialization ultimately going back to capitalism is a moot point as, for example, antibiotic research and mass production was highly successful in the socialist USSR once it got off the ground. Funnily enough, the CIA laments that Soviet antibiotics were of equivalent quality to American production, though the packaging supposedly lacked the elegance the US market is accustomed to. Interestingly, while researching for this, I discovered Soviet and Eastern Bloc research on bacteriophage therapy as an alternative to antibiotics going back decades, which is fascinating because it's something the West had abandoned decades ago, but only recently picked up again. Back to the video in just a second. Let's hear from today's sponsor, Atlas VPN. For a lot of research that I do for my videos, I end up hitting pages that aren't available in my location. That's frustrating as you can imagine, geo-restriction really does suck. But not with Atlas VPN. For those unaware, a virtual private network makes all of your internet traffic travel through an encrypted tunnel. This way, it protects you from spying, public Wi-Fi dangers, and hides your IP address and your online activities. It even allows you to change your location for all your researching needs. Currently, Atlas VPN has more than 6 million users worldwide, and boasts the best VPN deal on the market, with the most affordable online protection plan for just under $2 per month with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So what are you waiting for? Go down to the description and click that link, use my code Hakeem, and get a 3-year subscription for just $183 a month with 3 months free. But that's not all. You get blazing fast speeds for streaming or gaming, unlimited protection for all your devices, an inbuilt ad and malware blocker, and you'll get to save some extra cash as Atlas VPN will find you the best deals online for everything from your online subscriptions to airlines, hotels, and more. Grab this big deal because now Atlas VPN Premium is just $183 per month plus 3 months extra, and with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Protect your privacy and get the many benefits of Atlas VPN for this ridiculously low price. You can grab this deal by clicking the link in the video description below. Be quick as it's a time-limited offer. Massive thanks to Atlas VPN for the sponsorship. This is what allows me to pay my editor fairly, so the support is highly appreciated. Alright, back to the video.
Capitalism got a pretty bad rep when Marx claimed that it's just about grabbing hold of the means of production and exploiting the working class.
A horrible bastardization of Marx's incredibly sophisticated argument. Marxism makes no moral claims. Capitalism isn't bad because it's mean, it's bad because it's untenable and has inbuilt contradictions that are dangerous for the system itself, us as a species, and the planet, which I've made a relevant video on prior. Harvey's 17 Contradictions and the End of Capitalism is likewise a good primer on that, and also my 101 videos. The dismissal of Marx and subsequent developments of Marxism is so commonplace because once the arguments are confronted, they have no answer, so instead they just kind of pretend it doesn't exist, like children. Go into any major economics department in the US, for example, and you'll see only the loosest possible covering of Marx, but more often absolutely no mention of one of the most influential figures of the past 1,000 years, anywhere, in any meaningful and engaging way. This is by design.
Of course, there was an element of truth to his fears, because some things went badly wrong during the Industrial Revolution, but that's another story.
Ah yes, of course, and only then, right? Nothing since. Why did Greece burn down entirely and then get Noah's Ark last week? Oh, no reason.
For today, we just need to know that capitalism, like fiat money, requires a governing institution. That's because someone must be there to enforce contracts should the need arise. That and a few other things, as we'll see in a moment.
If you're interested in the development of liberalism, essentially the birthing ideology of capitalism, although by far not the only ideology capitalism inhabits, as well as the reason governing structures are the way they are, check out our 4-part series we did on our podcast, The Deprogram, titled Real Theory Hours Liberalism.
Even so, capitalism has been enormously successful in unlocking societal progress, and the nations who still don't use it, such as North Korea, Cuba, and Laos, are places you don't want to live.
This is so tiring. Lady, why is the DPRK poor? Have you ever asked yourself this? I have a video on the DPRK I recommend you watch here, but in summary, sanctions. They are artificially limited in every possible way by barriers to trade and imports, even for basic industrial prerequisites or medicines. If you shoot someone in the leg and they have difficulty walking afterwards, that's not exactly their fault now, is it? This is kind of an extension of the socialism has always failed point, which is blatantly not true, and I've made a dedicated video to that point. Likewise, all the research is very clear that socialism, given equal levels of economic development, is an objectively better system. Subsequent research indicates the same. She's touting an ideological point, not grounded in reality. As for Cuba, will you tell me if Haiti or Cuba is better, despite Cuba still being under one of the most vicious blockades humanity has known for more than half a century? I've likewise made a video on Cuba and their sanctions here. This is why I hate nonsense like this. Zero real thought, zero analysis, just a tired regurgitation of State Department nonsense that reinforces horrible and illegal crimes against sovereign nations solely because they refuse to toe the American line. More interestingly, she uses the examples of Cuba and the DPRK on the supposed failures of socialism, but to quote our favorite Latin lover, where is the success of capitalism in Asia, Africa, or Latin America? It's wrong to assume that the capitalist average is Norway. It isn't. Much closer is Bangladesh or Peru or Kenya. This is how ideology works, not facts but tired so-called truisms based on essentially nothing at all. This doesn't even scratch the surface of how those supposedly wealthy capitalist countries got so wealthy in the first place. Hint hint, it wasn't pleasant, nor ethical, nor even legal half the time, if at all. My video, Why Countries Stay Poor, goes into more detail here. Regardless, her admittance of China is interesting. Is it because she doesn't believe China is socialist? Is it because she has a nuanced understanding of the pitfalls of market socialism? Most likely not. It's most probably because China is doing fairly well, and doing well does not equal socialism in her mind. How do I know this? Well, Laos has a very similar system to Vietnam and China, as in a so-called market-oriented social system, yet she decided to use Laos as an example of not using capitalism while omitting Vietnam and China. Ideology is fun, isn't it?
We've seen that capitalism is a system that combines markets with governing rules to efficiently distribute resources.
That's not what capitalism is. Feudalism combined markets with governing rules, likewise with the Roman Empire and other slave societies too. Boiling down capitalism solely to markets shows you don't really know what capitalism is. Efficiently distributing resources is subjective depending on the end goal. Capitalism mobilizes resources towards profit, nothing else. In fact, rules and interventions by governments exist to attempt to impotently limit this core aspect of capitalism, such as emission limits or labor laws or taxation, all things capitalists fight tooth and nail against and often win.
This distribution of resources works best if everyone can put forward their offers freely and customers can pick what they want. This is known as a free market, and it optimizes the distribution of resources by competition. Free markets are a beautiful example of decentralized self-organization, an invisible hand, as Adam Smith put it.
This is all nice and good, but free markets don't and have basically never existed. This strikes me as someone who has read a single intro to economics book and then called it a day. The world is very different from the fictional and highly ideologized nonsense you find in what passes for economics education nowadays. Ha-Joon Chang, not a Marxist economist by any stretch of the imagination, has 2 great works on this topic: Bad Samaritans, The Myth of Free Trade and the Secret History of Capitalism, and 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism. Have a read, but in essence, all the usual nonsense justifications you hear are fiction, from free markets to how capitalist dogma explains how some countries got rich while others didn't. Interestingly, South Korea has banned some of his work for potentially being seditious. Ooh, gotta love that freedom of thought, guys, huh?
One of the most important insights to come out of this research area is that free markets only work to everyone's benefit if they're set up properly. Keep in mind that capitalism isn't just a free market, it's a free market plus the governing framework to run it.
I'm just tired. What does being set up properly entail, exactly? Doesn't she see that this is ideological language? For someone supposedly all about the science, she has a lot of blind faith in this stuff. Talk to a good chunk of Austrian school economists, for example, and you'll hear that the rules set up around free markets render those markets not free in the end at all. So does she settle on some Keynesian compromise instead? Seemingly not. She actually holds no concrete position on this setup she's talking about. This is just a garbled mess.
Free markets do not, for example, work to everyone's favor if some people have insider information, which gives them a trading advantage. This is why we have laws against that. Free markets also work badly if one single company dominates a market sector and can use their power to force customers to stick with them. This is why we have laws against that.
Oh, is that so? Then why is insider trading and insider information so ubiquitous in modern capitalist economies? Could it be, oh my god, a possible inbuilt feature being passed off as a correctable failure of the system? No, it can't be. Capitalism isn't a fairy tale, it's a real system with real people taking part in it. Whatever possible edge an enterprise or group can get to win in the market, they'll take it no matter the legal, moral, ethical, or environmental cost. Be it insider trading, fudging emission data, dodging taxes, illegal market consolidation, lobbying against environmental legislation, or a dozen other ways. As for monopolies, well, you see, in market competition you have winners. Winners consolidate market share and eventually develop into monopolies of one form or another. This is the natural course of the system. Marx termed this the centralization of capital and is what we've been seeing since the late 1800s. And nowhere is this clearer than in media ownership concentration, although the pattern is reproducible across practically every other field.
Free markets also don't automatically account for externalities, such as environmental pollution. An externality is generally any consequence of trade that doesn't directly affect the trading parties. They can be both good and bad, but it's the bad ones that are the problem. Suppose there's a river going by your house that everyone is free to use. One day a clothing company puts up a factory and dumps their toxic waste into the river. Or the fish die and no one dares swimming in the river anymore. This is clearly not an optimal use of resources, you might say. Why didn't Smith's invisible hand prevent it? The reason market forces didn't prevent it is that the water was free to use. The market didn't know it had any value, so pollution couldn't reduce its value. There are several ways to deal with problems like this. One is to just pass laws that forbid certain actions and punish those who disobey. Or you can put a tax on the pollution so that at least the government has money to clear up the mess. Or you can put a price on using the water. There are pros and cons to all of those, but that's a different story.
And this is the system she called genius just a few minutes back. The issue is her solution to this is untenable and boils down to not stopping pollution, but instead attempting to dissuade pollution long term through laws that will definitely get gridlocked or blocked, taxation initiatives that will likewise be lobbied against, or other castrated attempts. A genuine solution would be, for example, immediate nationalization should they not comply with X set of criteria for environmental pollution by a short time frame. The issue here is, why bother when it's clear that letting the capitalist system continue as it is will only result in more of these sorts of issues? We already have a better template. The research is clear, socialism is the proper answer here. The best example of this would be Cuban and Chinese efforts at mitigating climate change, some of the few actually successful examples on Earth currently. Here's a good read to get you started. Of course, this doesn't mean Cuba or China's perfect, blah blah, I don't need to say this.
The story for today is that we have known that externalities can lead to market failures since the middle of the last century. Carbon dioxide emissions are such an externality. For the market to optimize the use of fossil fuel resources, we should have put a price on releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. We did not, and that's why we're now in deep shit.
Not only externalities. Market failures are a core aspect of capitalism. Boom and bust cycles are and always will be ever present, either due to crises of overproduction or a million other reasons. Again, what sense does it make to have a system that implodes in on itself every 5 to 7 years, destroying massive amounts of production, the capital acquired for that production, millions of people's lives, and the planet? Also, why didn't we put a price? All of scientific consensus was clear that we're heading down a dangerous path and need to do something about it immediately, but nothing was done. I wonder why. Could it possibly be because the capitalist system prioritizes short-term profit over anything else, and as a result this basically didn't and continues not to matter for the vast majority of industry? You can't separate the politics from capitalism. It's not only an economic system.
So yes, our current capitalist systems do have a problem with environmental protection, but the reason isn't that there's something wrong with capitalism per se. It's that we didn't set it up correctly in the first place.
This sounds like an abused person making excuses for their abuser, because it essentially is.
The current situation is that companies who voluntarily produce environmentally friendly goods put themselves at a competitive disadvantage because other companies exploit the environment at zero cost. This moves the burden onto the consumer. If you want to buy a climate-friendly product today, you face extra costs because fossil fuels are cheap and getting to net zero is not.
Exactly right. Finally some sense, and that's why capitalism is untenable, amongst many other reasons. But I'm sure she'll make more excuses in just a second.
This makes no economic sense, and it'll ultimately not work. It's completely upside down. Products whose production causes damage to the environment, which then requires adaptation and mitigation, should be more expensive, not less expensive.
Of course, it makes economic sense is exactly what's happening. Either they skirt environmental legislation, or they pass off the cost to the consumer. Profits are sacred. Your budget, living standards, and the environment are not. Her thinking that products damaging to the environment should be more expensive is a thinking which can be made into reality only when the government is not ultimately owned and controlled by capital, which is never the case under capitalism, as capitalists are the ruling class and reproduce their power, ownership, and privilege through the use of said state. Unless the state is in the hands of the working class, markets are entirely subdued for planned purposes or otherwise suppressed, and an economic plan instated, this will continue to be the case.
This is why economists have argued for decades that we need to put a price on carbon, and it's why several countries have now introduced carbon taxes or use a cap and trade system.
Again, that's all well and good, but carbon taxes haven't worked, nor are they a solution which is made clear by the lightest thought on the topic, let alone the research. In a nutshell, production shifted to places with less legislation, the taxes are simply paid and polluting behaviors continued, carbon credits are simply purchased from other enterprises, or 1,000 other methods. This is a band-aid, and a bad one at that, not a solution.
Capitalism has been incredibly successful in advancing society. To the extent that it has caused us problems, it's because we haven't properly used it. The solution is not to abandon it, but to make sure it works to our advantage. There's no simple way to do that, and everyone who claims that the solution is to either discard capitalism or blindly trust it didn't understand the problem in the first place.
How convenient. Capitalism got us into a mess, threatening the extinction of the species. Let's just keep going down this road, I'm sure it'll work out. I think it's been made more than clear that this person, who I'm sure is very knowledgeable on other topics, happens to not have done much research into this one and relied on tired ideologizing and a fairy tale understanding of the capitalist system. I've thrown several books at you today, but one last one to recommend is Economic Planning in an Age of Climate Crisis by Paul Cockshott and co. It goes into a lot of the detail you'll need, really. And that's that. People are absolutely eating our live in the comments, so I've kept this brief. If you enjoy what I do, then please consider supporting me on Patreon, it really does help. I'd like to thank my patrons, so thank you to
Nitro Dubs, Kenny, Thomas Roberts, Nicholas, Owen Baker, T. Wood, Dr. Lemonman, Lumix, Charlie and Eric, Ultimate Turin, Daniel Ethel, The Generic Guy, Santiago Pereira, Rain, Cassandra Corvus, David Fries, Confuse M, Mariana Mastusovic, Robbie Richardson, and Masay Kudrow. Thanks for watching.